Good morning! How are you? This is Ria Luz of Buhay Buhay sa Amerika. And this morning, I am so excited that finally the book that I have been reading, The Mother of Peace, it is actually like almost $18 on its first release. And there was an sale at Amazon for 411 for one book, maximum of four. So today I actually got that books in the mail. So I am so excited that I have four more books that I can share to my friends. And if you are interested, hello, Akinatsu and Pinay Lifestyle in Taiwan. Thank you so much for joining me. Isn't that amazing? Have you read this book, The Mother of Peace? And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. This is a memoir by Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, an amazing woman leader that we should all understand, and we should really find out about her life, because her story is a story that can change every woman's life, and not only women but also men. Her story can change, can inspire us from the many aspects of her life. And I have actually made a live stream of reading her book. And today I am so excited. I got four more books that I can share to my friends, because this is the book that needs to be shared to more people. And I want to use my live stream as something that can help others to, not only after you watch the live stream is enough, but something that you can go back again and again and you wanted to read. So please join me as I continue reading this book. Thank you so much, Pinay Lifestyle in Taiwan. Thank you for joining me. I have to read with glasses because I am now getting old and my glasses is getting getting hard to read without to to read this. Sorry, I have to show there. And thank you so much. And please drop your link as I read the comments. Oh, thank you so much. I'm Jen, Lito Juliano TV. Please join me mga kapatid for this. This is going to be our hundoke. Hundoke is a Korean word for meaning reading together God's words. So it's morning time here in America, and I'm sure it's nighttime in Asia. It's about time to sleep and think of beautiful things before we sleep. So I'm actually on my, the last time I read was on page 50. I ended up there where it's on this page, the world divides at the 38th parallel. So maybe since most of you have not, some of you may not be able to have not join me from the last reading, then I will start from this page 48. World divides at the 38th parallel. Thank you so much for joining. And hayan, keep reading, sabi ni Lito Juliano, dito lang host. Thank you, Lito. At maraming salamat, Pinay Lifestyle in Taiwan. Makinig lang daw siya din. At ayan, salamat sa inyong mga kapatid for coming. So makinig na lang kayo at habang ako'y magbabasa. Thank you, Lito Juliano, at everybody. World divides at the 38th parallel. You came to see your mother. You asked guard. The guard asked this question as a formality. He knew I was there because I came every day. Yes, sir, I would respond in my soft voice. Wait here, he would say, in a fatherly tone. I'll call her for you. Would you like a candy? This is the book I am reading. So for you to know the book that I am reading. Since I have now 4 books, yan. Thank you so much for joining, mga kapatid. Sabi ni Lito Juliano, keep reading, dito lang daw siya. So ayan, I continue. He said, wait here, he would say in a fatherly tone, I'll call her for you. Would you like a candy? In 1948, when the oppression of religions by North Korea's Communist Party was at its height, my mother and grandmother were imprisoned for nearly 2 weeks for being members of the Inside the Womb Church. I was 5 years old at the time, and I would go to the prison to see my mother. The mother was in prison just because of being a part of a church. It is so hard. We're so lucky that we don't have to experience such. I was 5 years old at the time, and I would go to the prison to see my mother. The guards were nice to me because I was polite and well behaved. Even those ruthless communists gave me fruit or candy when they saw me. I cannot explain why the authorities released both of them as the party was increasing. I cannot explain why the authorities released both of them as the party was increasing its suppression of religious activities. Perhaps it was out of their concern for me. The good result was that the imprisonment convinced my grandmother that to live a peaceful life, let alone a life of faith, they had to go to South Korea. And since Ho Ho Bin was still in prison, my mother was of 2 minds about it. But grandmother persuaded her to go. If we stay here, she reasoned, we will die before we meet the Lord. Once we are in South Korea and have met up with Sun Jong, the right way will appear. The mention of her younger brother, my uncle Hong Sun Jong, who was preparing to be a medical practitioner in the South, swayed my mother. She mounted a last protest as she gave in. How can we go there with no destination? We don't even have a place to stay. Grandmother took a deep breath and said firmly, we still must go. God will protect us. My grandfather did not join us. Like many, he had received the revelation that Pyongyang was the place of Eden, and he was determined to remain there to guard it. Nonetheless, he encouraged his wife and daughter to leave for the South because her purpose in life was to meet the Lord at the second advent in Pyongyang. My mother had to pray for several days and nights before finally agreeing to go to South Korea. And she even went on the condition that it would be temporary. As good luck would have it, we received the news that Uncle Sunjong had completed his studies in Japan and in Seoul and had joined the South Korean army. My uncle was an intellectual and a dapper young man. Moreover, he was very strong-minded. My grandmother missed her son and wished very much to see him. In addition, she wanted to protect me, her granddaughter, at all costs. She wanted to prevent my being taken by the cruel communists and made to suffer at their hands. She was sincere when she told me repeatedly over the years, you are God's daughter. Her mission in life was to protect me from the misfortunes of the world. Along with most people in the North, my family believed that North Korea's Communist Party would not last long. We expected that after a short stay in South Korea, we would see the downfall of the communists and be able to return home. As history shows, this dream was not to be realized. As we crossed the 38th parallel, we never considered returning to the North. Looking back, I believe that God worked through my grandmother's affectionate heart for her son and granddaughter. When all is said and done, a mother's parental heart reflects God's motherly heart. It is dark now, my mother whispered. Let's go. It was the autumn of 1948, and we left our home in the middle of the night. My mother carrying me on her back, and my grandmother carrying a couple of bundles. It is quite a distance from Anju to the 38th parallel, 200 kilometers, 125 miles, as the crow files, as the crow flies. We had to walk for days and days to cover that distance. 125 miles, that's a lot. And we took every step on that journey with anxiety, fearing for our lives. At night, we slept in empty houses, and when the morning dew fell, we would start again. Our shoes were flimsy, and the roads were rough, and so our feet ached from the very start. That was the hardest to endure. What was hardest to endure was the hunger. We could knock on the doors of shabby cottages and give them something from our bundles in exchange for food, which was usually a cup of boiled barley and rice. Undergoing such hardship, we walked and walked endlessly southward. The communists had plowed the fields and broken up the shoulders of roads to make such a journey even more difficult. Our feet sank into mud as we walked through the field, and we shivered all over with the cold. Still, we continued. I am crying. I can tears coming because I know the life of this Dr. Hak Jae Moon, and looking back at how she came to the South, it's amazing. Our feet sank into mud as we walked through the fields, and we shivered all over with cold. Still, we continued on, looking only at the starlight. North Korean People's Army soldiers were blocking the 38th parallel, and they easily captured my mother, grandmother, and me. They locked us up in a shed, together with our frightened people, together with other frightened people who had the same intention as we did. The soldiers were rough with the men, but they did not treat women and children harshly. One day, one of the adults asked me to take food to the soldiers standing watch. Though my heart trembled inside, I forced a smile and handed a food to the soldiers. After I had done so several times, the soldiers' heart softened, and one night they set my family free. They instructed us to return to our hometown, and we walked out to their side in that direction. And then, as we stood at the crossroads between life and death, night fell, and we waited. And heaven sent a young man to guide us to the path of life. Under the covers of darkness, we followed him across. Under the covers of darkness, we followed him across the 38th parallel. As we crossed, it was so happy that I said to mother, "We don't have to sing songs praising Kim Il sung anymore, do we? I will sing a song from the southern part of Korea. This too was God's intervention. For on South, for on South Korean side, soldiers also were keeping a strict watch. I sang a few lines of the song with a joyous heart. At that moment, we heard a rustling in the bushes in front of us. We were surprised and stood frozen in place, fearful that we would be captured by North Korean soldiers once again. Soldiers emerged from the bushes. South Koreans! At the sight of them, we almost wilted in relief. Those South Korean soldiers told us that they had heard us as we approached and had been about to fire upon us. They had heard the voice of a child singing, and they had lowered their weapons. They welcomed us and comforted us. One soldier said, "It must have been difficult for you to make it all this way with this beautiful young child. Isn't this isn't much, but please take it." We were so grateful to this soldier whom God moved to give us money, enough to get us to Seoul. Looking back, if I had not sung that at that moment, those young soldiers probably would have mistaken us for North Korean soldiers and shot us dead. In that way, once again, God protected us. We arrived safely in South Korea after undergoing hardship such as this. Yet in making that journey, we parted from my grandfather, whom we never saw again. South Korea was a strange place to us. Having never been to Seoul, we had no idea how we could survive. We were we were getting lost constantly. We also had lost the moorings of our faith. The hope to meet the returning Lord was indeed floating in the clouds. We had no money and no skills to make a living. We camped in a shabby, empty house and barely made it through each day. All we could do was talk to people. Our most urgent task was to find my maternal uncle, Sunjong. He was the only person we could depend on in South Korea, and we were hoping he was somewhere in Seoul. My mother pleaded in prayer. What should I do to find my younger brother? She prayed most earnestly every day to find her brother, in whom she could rely. We devoted ourselves to this searching by visiting clinics and pharmacies. Then we received an unexpected blessing from God. We met a man on the street who turned out to be a friend of my uncle's. This was indeed God's providential help. His friend told us that Uncle Sunjong was serving at the army's headquarters in Seoul's Yongsan district. After returning from Japan, he had graduated from the College of Pharmacy in Seoul and then received training as a pharmaceutical officer in the Korean Military Academy. He was currently serving as a first lieutenant. This kind man took us to Yongsan, and what a reunion it was! Song Jong was delighted to see his mother, sister, and niece. He had no idea of the condition in the north. He was so distressed to hear what we had gone through to get to Seoul. He immediately rented a small room for us in Yeochangdong. Yeochangdong. Our life in South soon stabilized. I entered Yeochang Primary School and in the free land of South Korea began going. I am in tears because I know how difficult the life of Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, and knowing how they have persevered, leaving the north to go to the south. I entered Yeochang Primary School and in the free land of South Korea began going to school for the first time. I love going to school with my bags of books every day. The older residents of the neighborhood would pat me on the head, and the neighborhood children also liked me very much. Looking back, I find it interesting that our rented room was close to Chongpadong, the neighborhood in which 7 years later we would end our search for the Lord of the Second Advent. Until that day arrived, however, we endured many twists and turns on our odyssey. While at Yo Changdong, we heard the news that Jong Sok John, the eldest son of the founder of the Holy Lord Church, had settled in South Korea. We took it as a miracle and prayed that God would guide us to meet him. All in all, we praise God that my uncle was serving as an army officer and that Jong Song Chok's family from Holy Lord Church had come to the south. Without doubt, our heavenly parent prepared a path to protect the one called to serve humankind as the only begotten daughter, the one whom he would entrust the providence. Now that our physical pilgrimage had reached an oasis, it was time to renew our spiritual pilgrimage. Page 53. A blue flash of death. As early on a hot summer morning, red balsam flowers blossomed on one side of our courtyard, and thick old willow and sycamore trees stood along the street. I was 7 years old, but I remember the moment clearly as a frantic neighbor burst into our living room with the words, "War has broken! The North Korean army has crossed the 38th parallel." Apprehensive residents gathered in the alley in groups of two and three. I had been getting used to settle life in the south, but when the North Korean People's Army launched their invasion, our short respite was over. Everyone was frightened. Government report mingled with rumors, and no one knew for sure what was going on. What happened was that the South Korean interim government packed up and moved to the city of Daejeon, 90 miles to the south of Seoul. The government ordered the South Korean army to blow up the Han River Bridge, the only bridge across the Han River on the south side of Seoul. They expected the North Korean troops to arrive in Seoul soon and had no means to protect the city. Their strategy was to protect the communist army was to prevent the communist army from crossing the river. They could do little or nothing to help the city's residents, who were crying out for Seoul's defense. 2 days later, my mother woke up at dawn and began packing our clothes in a bundle. Awakened by the rustling noise, I kept my eyes shut and listened to her conversation with my grandmother. We had to see we had to seek refuge, my mother said. If the communists get here, they'll kill us. I know they're bad. My grandmother responded, but do you think they would treat women harshly? They, if they find out we had escaped from the north, my mother reasoned, they probably kill, they probably will kill us on the spot. On the evening of June 25, 1950, 2 days after the start of the Korean War, Seoul residents streamed out of the city's ancient neighborhood under a gentle summer rain. The more they realized that they were not the only ones seeking to escape, and that they all had to cross the same bridge, the more serious and desperate they became. This was war. My grandmother, mother, and I joined the exodus with our bundle, following the throng moving toward the Han River Bridge. When this dim shape appeared in the dark, something told me to stop, and I grabbed my mother's skirt. She stopped in her tracks, and my mother turned and asked her, "Mother, what's wrong?" Grandmother looked up at the sky and then glanced down at me. Then she turned her head again in the direction of our house. "Soon Jong may come," she said with a steady tone, speaking of her son, my uncle. It seemed senseless to turn around when everyone else was fleeing the south. She was firm. "Let's go back. Let's go back in case he does." My mother understood. The three of us made our way back home, fighting the crowds. When we got home, I spread out my blanket and lay down to sleep. It was not long before I was awakened by the noise of a 3-ton truck. Its headlights illuminated our room as the door suddenly burst open. There was my uncle in his military uniform. My mother and mother gasped sighs of relief and hope. I thought to myself, we can leave now and feel at ease. Hurry, he barked. We have to move on. We have to move now. Uncle Sunjong, base on the army headquarters, was a military medic. I was aware of the progress of the war, and as soon as he heard that the South Korean army was preparing to destroy the Han River Bridge, he, re- he, re- he requisitioned a truck and sped to our home. Knowing his family was in danger, he had left the truck with its engine running on our foggy alley. We climbed with our already packed bundle, and he drove toward the bridge. In the pre-dawn hours, crowds of refugees were swarming there from all directions, creating total chaos. We moved forward at a snail's we moved forward at a snail's pace on the congested street. As an army officer, my uncle had official pass necessary to take a vehicle across the bridge. Honking the horn, he inched the track through the crowd, held my mother's arm. I clung to her and gazed at the people fleeing their homes, their fear and confusion increasing by the minute. As soon as we had crossed the bridge, my uncle shouted, "Get down on your seats!" As I squeezed down on the floor at my mother's feet, a huge explosion behind us shook our truck. There was a blue flash and a deafening sound. My uncle set the emergency brake and turned off the engine. Together, we the truck and clambered down into the ditch by the side of the road. I turned my face to the bridge and witnessed the next explosion. I saw the light like a demon's burning eyes, piercing the night. Countless civilians, as well as soldiers and policemen who were crossing the bridge, were thrown about like plastic toys, flying everywhere, cast into the river below. For us, a few meters proved to be a difference between life and death. Our lives had been spared. I closed my eyes and many thoughts flashed across my mind. Why would anyone start war? Why did innocent people have to die? Why, God, permitting such pain and suffering? Who can bring an end to this madness? I could not conceive of any answer. When I reopened my eyes, I saw that the bridge was cut in half. The military had accomplished its mission at the cost of hundreds of lives. What remained amid the corpse, the screaming wounded, and the dazed survivors was an ugly skeleton of steel, moldering in the dark. The Han River Bridge was blown up at 3 a.m. on June 28, 1950. Even though the South Korean government had announced that it would defend Seoul with Siberia, the only link to safety. Even before the North Korean People's Army came into the city, hundreds of people fleeing the city were killed. Amid this desperate crisis, through the help of my uncle, my life and the lives of my family were preserved. At that critical moment, God guided me and protected me from danger. Even today, whenever I cross the bridge over the Han River, I see that blue flash and hear people's agonized screams echoing as they still are burning in hell. My heart aches at the sound. At a young age, I directly witnessed the horror of war and experienced the of a refugee, wretched life of a refugee. The simple and innocent were killed like flies. Children who had lost their parents were crying and wandering in the street. I was only 7, but I became so serious that war had to vanish forever from the world. It took place 70 years ago. but my throat still tightens when I recall the night the Han River Bridge fell. Left by my uncle, I had to return to military duty. Left by my uncle who had to return to military duty, barely able to keep ourselves in one piece. My grandmother, mother, and I walk on unfamiliar paths, heading south. Once in a while, we got a ride in passing cars, in a passing car, sending a document as to my uncle's position as a medic. We finally gained shelter in a refugee camp for military families. As the tide of the war shifted on September 28th, we returned to Seoul. The South Korean military had driven out the communists and reconstructed a passable bridge across the river. We lodged in an empty house, one that the soldiers from the north had occupied, to which the owners did not return. When the tide of war turned again, 500,000 communist children, Chinese troops invaded Korea across the Yalu River. On January 4, 1951, the South Korean army gained abandoned Seoul. On January 4, 1951, the South Korean army again abandoned Seoul, and we again had to escape. This time we were able to board a train for the families of soldiers, and we safely arrived in the city of Daegu. The day after days, sights and sounds of our year-long wilderness course from the north to the south defy description. I saw countless dead bodies, adults, children, victims of freezing, starvation, disease, and battle. My family and I also teetered on the brink of death, but somehow, throughout this journey for survival, I felt God was with us. There was a greater power protecting our family as we escaped the north and found refuge in the south. Heavenly Parent gave me more than a sense of meaning and value. He provided me with a scale by which no measure my purpose in life. He provided me with a measure. He provided me with a scale by which to measure my purpose in life. Thank you so much for joining. And it's The Way of God's Will on page 57. The Way of God's Will. Page 57. Thank you for joining me. By God's hand, on our way to Daegu, we met Johnson, Johnson, John Sok Chon, a member of the Holy Lord Church, to which my family had belonged in Chosun. He was very pleased to see us, and we all felt as if we were meeting long-lost relatives. The Holy Lord Church was the church in which my parents were married. The and Chong Sok Chon's mother, Kim Song-do, was its founder. She was one of the many female church leaders in the northern part of Korea whose devotion to Jesus was unparalleled and who had received revelation of what was to come. The Holy Lord Church had withered due to Japanese persecution, and the Communist Party's brutal oppression had put an end to it, and all churches in the north escaping to the south. Chok Jong Chok Chon continued to worship God, in which scattered Holy Lord's Church members who had found each other. He created a prayer group in Daegu. He maintained his ardor to accomplish God's will and prepared himself to meet the returning Lord. He also worked diligently and had a good livelihood managing mining, rice, and oil businesses. Mr. Jong organized our lodging in Daegu. My mother made a simple request of him. When we were in North Korea, he said, "We received much grace through Mrs. Ho Bin. and there were great works. Mr. John knew of Reverend Hall, whose congregation had prepared food and clothes for Jesus, as well as for the second coming Lord. As the Lord will return to Korea soon, my mother said to Mr. Jong, please, let us pray very hard to welcome him. One morning, during the Davis group's intense prayer, my mother received a revelation from heaven. God told her that he had to live a life of greater devotion if she wanted to meet the Lord on the second advent. Prayer alone is not enough, she was told. You had to eat my food and cook. You have to eat your food and cook. My mother began to subsist on pine needles, which have been digestible had they been steamed, but she ate them raw, even though they badly damaged her teeth. My mother had come from a relatively well-to-do family. Her father had owned a large farm, and grandmother Ho had a sewing machine shop, so they were able to pay for my mother and her brother to attend high school. My maternal grandfather always taught my mother, no matter how hard things may be, you must never be indebted to others. Abiding by his words there in Daegu, my mother opened a small shop, thinking that it would provide enough money to enable her to re-enroll her only daughter in elementary school. Daily subsistence of 2 meals of kimchi broth, raw pine needle tips and peanuts, plus taking care of her shop, exhausted my mother's physical frame. A normal person would have eased off that discipline, but for my mother, her mind only became clearer when I saw her serene countenance. While feeling sympathy for her, I could not help but be amazed. How can she run a business while consuming so little? I asked myself. It is nothing less than a miracle. My mother maintained a near starvation diet, and her shop did not bring profit for 3 months. Most people would have given up, but her faith was deep, and with supreme confidence that she was upholding God's dream. She persevered unconditionally. She did not compromise with reality. With the Holy Spirit, she created her own reality. No matter her plight, my mother surrendered her mind to her search for Jesus at his return. Now, no matter her flight, my mother surrendered her mind to her search for Jesus at his return. Now as I began to mature, she added to that the task of providing her daughter a spiritually safe environment. She wanted me to reach in an environment of internal and external purity, and she considered how to separate me as much as possible from the influence of the secular world. I was attending Daegu Elementary School in a neighborhood called Bonsang-dong. As time passed, not only my face but also my bearing became attractive. I was good at my studies, as so as so I soon became popular among my friends, and I was well liked by many adults as well. One afternoon, I was playing alone in the narrow street in front of the shop. We, I was playing alone on the narrow street in front of the shop. With my mother inside, a Buddhist monk walked by, and I caught his eye, and he stopped. I returned his gaze, and I remember his piercing eyes. My mother came out and bowed politely to him. Pointing to me, he asked, is she your daughter? Hearing her affirmative answer, his eyes turned warm and deep. As I turned to look at my mother, the holy man spoke. You live with only one daughter, but don't envy someone who has 10 sons. Please raise her well. This daughter of yours is going to be married at a young age. Her future husband may be older than he is, but He'll be a great man with outstanding ability that transcends the sea, the land, and the skies. My mother took the ascetic's word seriously, acting on her intention to rear her only daughter in the most serene and secure surroundings. In 1954, my mother moved us to Jeju Island off the southern coast of the Korean peninsula to the town of Seogwipo. She wanted to leave the crowded city street and allow me to mature in the pristine countryside. We spent our first 9 months in Jeju with the family of Jong Sok-jin, the younger brother of our Holy Lord Church friend, Jong Sok-jon. On Jeju, as she had everywhere, my mother led me on the path of sainthood for the Lord, with no thought of worldly matters, and this fit my emerging personality very well. I read biographies of holy women and devoted myself to the ideal of completely in preparation to receive my calling as a daughter of God. Once settled in Soweto, I enrolled in Shinyo Elementary School as a fifth grader. At the age of 11, while my classmates were running around and playing, I lived a rigorous and strict life of faith. With my grandmother and mother, I devoted myself to prayer, worship, and study. My mother soaked flattened barley in water and added it to radish kimchi for her raw food diet while I ate millet porridge. Even though weak due to nutritional privation, when she saw farmers working the barley fields, my mother would not resist helping with the plowing. If she saw someone having a difficulty carrying a load, she would volunteer to carry it for them. Without her saying a word, people were filled with admiration. I've never met such a thoughtful person. One village woman would say to another, who would respond? That's what I'm saying. I heard he's a regular churchgoer, but still he's so different from the others. My mother lived the exemplary life of an authentically religious person, always putting her faith into practice by helping others. She studied the Bible and shared with me the teachings of the Holy Lord Church and the Inside the Womb Church that Jesus would return as a man in the flesh, just as he had come 2,000 years ago, and that she would find his holy bride and hold the marriage supper of the Lamb, as the Bible prophesies, and that all this would take place in Korea. From her I learned the meaning of Jesus' second advent, and would imagine and taste and touch it. And from my mother I learned the meaning of true discipleship. My uncle, who had rescued us out of the outbreak of the Korean War, married at the end of that war, and Grandmother Jo, who went to live with him and his new bride and soul. Within a few months, she was longing to see her daughter and granddaughter, and she came to visit us in Jeju Island. While she was with us, my uncle was posted to the city of Chuncheon, some 50 miles northeast of Seoul. She said he sent us an abrupt but clear message: "Please wrap up your life in Jeju and move to Chun Chuncheon." My grandmother Jo urged us to comply, saying softly, with the pleading eyes of a loving matriarch, "Please, my only pleasure in life is to have Hakja nearby and take care of her every day." That was it. In February 1955, we all three departed Jeju, bound for Chonjon. My mother rented a small room for us in Yaksadong neighborhood, and my grandmother lived with my uncle's family nearby. I enrolled in Bongui Elementary School and soon entered the sixth grade. On the school grounds stood a big sycamore tree, its circumference greater than I could reach around. I read books under its abundant shade in the hot weather. There was a coal briquette factory next to the school, and my shoes would be covered with black soot when I walked past. All this springs out in fresh in my memory. In the next year, 1956, I graduated from elementary school. I was 13 and I received my graduation certificate after having attended four different schools. Though I had been a student at Bongwi about 1 year, I was honored at the graduation ceremony with an award for doing well in my studies. God finally responded to my mother's ceaseless prayers and pleadings. His care for her once again was extended through Jong Sok Chon, our friend from the Holy Lord Church. Mr. Jong remembered the last word of his late mother, the Holy Lord Church founder, Reverend Kim Songdo. If someone fails to accomplish what God has entrusted him to do, it must be accomplished through someone else. The group through which the Lord is coming will be accused and slandered as a sex cult. Its members will be persecuted and imprisoned. If you fear of such a church, know that it will be the true church, and that you should personally investigate it and decide for yourself. So Mr. Jong diligently traveled the country to participate in revival meetings. He did not find what he was looking for until 1955, when he read in the Dong Ilbo, a newspaper, about an incident at Iowa Women's University. Five Iowa professors had been fired from the faculty for joining a group called the Unification Church, led by a man called by Teacher Moon. And 14 students had been expelled from the same school for the same reason. Sensing the spirit of his prophetic mother, Mr. Jones sent a letter with a newspaper clipping to his older sister in Busan. His sister took a look at the clipping and, without thinking twice, booked passage to Seoul with her daughter. They arrive and find their way to the Jung-dong headquarters of the Unification Church, but were unable to meet its leader at that time. The members told them the location of the Unification Church in Busan, and she returned home. From there, she informed her younger brother what was happened, and that there was another Unification Church in Daegu. Chong Sok-chon visited the church in Daegu, listened to Divine Principle lectures, accepted its teaching and joined. Then out of the blue, 10 days later, the group was sent reeling. On July 4, Teacher Moon and several of his church members were incarcerated at Seoul Daemun Prison in Seoul. Mr. Jong traveled to Seoul to visit Teacher Moon in prison. In that visit, he received inspiration and encouragement. Mr. Jong knew he had found the one whom Jesus had sent. Some 3 months later, on October 4, Teacher Moon was acquitted of all the charges for which he had been imprisoned. At that point, Mr. Jong secured his family's support in Daegu and moved to Seoul to devote himself full-time to God's will. At his release from Daemun, Teacher Moon visited Daegu. At the time, I was 12 years old, living with my family in Chongson. Several hours north of Daegu, one morning, my mother told me that she had a dream of cuddling a white dragon in her arms. She did not know what the white dragon symbolized, nor what it meant to cradle it in her arms, but she said that something earth-shaking was about to transpire. That very day she received a letter from Mr. Jong about his meeting the Divine Principle movement and meeting Teacher Moon in prison. And who Teacher Moon is, and that Teacher Moon was in Daegu. My mother left for Daegu immediately, only to find that Teacher Moon had returned to Seoul. My mother kept my mother felt deep regret, and while staying overnight in Daegu, he had another dream. In it, he saw a pair of golden dragons prostrating themselves into the direction of Seoul. With his vision curved into her heart, she took a train to Seoul the next morning and proceeded to the Unification Movement's newly purchased headquarters church in Chongpadong. It was early in December 1955. There she met the teacher, of the Unification Church for the first time. The moment she greeted him, he realized that the white dragon in her dream represented none other than him, and that he was the one he had been seeking. He was deeply moved to meet in her lifetime on earth the Lord of the second advent, from whom he had suffered and sacrificed for 3 decades. He stayed at Chompadong to study the divine principle and heard teaching that put together what she had learned in the Holy Lord Church. And inside the womb church, with each lecture, her eyes were opened and her initial inspiration was confirmed. At times, she pondered the meaning of her dreams and a pair of golden dragons. Not coming up with anything, she put that on her mind. Despite my mother's admiration of him, and in contrast to his affectionate openness with everyone else, Teacher Moon related to my mother in a formal and reserved fashion. As a result, she felt empty and a little bit isolated. With a feeling of lack of love lodging in her heart, she invested in prayer silently, without rest, erasing from her soul all the concepts and expectations she may have had about whom she was going to meet. Then one Sunday, Teacher Moon preached a sermon about the heart of Jesus. He said, the people of Israel did not welcome Jesus, who came as their true father. They allowed him to die on the cross and asked the congregation, do you know how great was the sin they have committed? Upon hearing this, my mother withdrew into a corner of the church. There she wept, crying her heart out for the remainder of the service. Teacher Moon reviewed this. Teacher Moon viewed his. And after the service, he called to my mother and consoled her, saying, a person anointed by God must pass the test of Satan as well as that of heaven. At that, like a snow melting in springtime, all sorrows disappeared from my mother's heart. Her pain in God, in her faith in God became stronger than it ever was. Soon, therefore, she returned to Chonjon to commence pioneer work for the Unification Church. Wow. Well, that is a good chapter. And I'll start the next one on chapter the marriage supper of the Lamb. And thank you so much for all of you for staying with me for this 1 hour reading. This is an amazing story. I appreciate all of you for coming and joining me. Thank you so much. I'm Yen, uh, my good brother Marbuk TV came. Thank you so much. Bet TV also came. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all of you for staying despite the the just me reading. This is a very very amazing story, and I hope not only an amazing story, but this is a true life story. And she is alive. She's 77 years old now. And as we continue reading, you'll be amazed what this woman have accomplished. And from what we have just read, uh, just from her age 12, and much more, if you see what more she will accomplish in life as she gets older. And as I told you, she's now 77. So if you bear with me, help me and come join me again as we read this book. This is the book that everyone should read and understand because amazing story of love, faith, perseverance, and the determination to love God at all costs and serve God at all costs. This is the story of Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, and I hope you can learn her story. And if you bear with me and read this over, I will send you a book. This is my gift to all of you. No matter where you are in the world, I will send the book to you. Uh, if you join me at the end. And thank you so much. This is a book that everyone should be able to read. Uh, I hope I gave life to the book as I read to it, because I could not help but cry looking back at the life that was led by this amazing leader, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon. And we call her True Mother. That's why she's called Mother of Peace. Thank you so much, Lito Juliano TV, Pinay Lifestyle in Taiwan, Santi Melchor. Thank you so much, kapatid, for joining me. And thank you so much, Santi Melchor, for staying and listening. And to all of you who joined me at this, thank you so much. Marbuk TV, San Tomas Sagayo, much. Bet TV, thank you so much. Ayan, nag-thumbs up. Please don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the reading, and there's more to come on reading this amazing story. Thank you so much to all of you who thumbs up, and thank you so much. I saw a new name. Sorry, I'm trying to read your names. Thank you, Ella Gimayer. Thank you so much, my brother Dan from Nepal, all the way from Nepal. Ella Gimayer, thank you. Are you the husband to our good brother in New York? Thank you so much. Dikit na kita ate. With Kalembang, thanks. Magandang tambayan ito para sa mga blessed wife. Yay! Thank you. Oh, Pilipina pala ang asawa ni Jimair. Ang aking kapal. I know your husband, but not the wife. Thank you so much, Ella. Thank you. Yes, yes. A jacket. Sorry, I'm in the StreamYard, but I will definitely give you a jacket, Ella Gimair. Thank you so much for all of you for joining, and thank you. Thanks for another inspiring reading. Hundukin na natin to. Yes, let's do this every morning, mga kapatid, and so we can continue reading the book, The Mother of Peace, and we can share to the world the value of this book. And as I said, you join me, and at the end, I give you the book. I will send it to you. Send me your address, and I'll send you wherever you are in the world, and I'll send the book to you. That is my. That is more. This book is more than watch hours. This is a book that everyone should read. So this is my parapol, Mother of Book, the Peace, the book, Mother of Peace, which is an amazing book that everyone should get and be and read. And thank you so much, Marbuk TV, for inspiring me. And maybe the next time I do my live streaming in the morning, let's do this as our hundoke. And thank you so much for joining me again, for all of you for coming. And thank you, Pinay Lifestyle. Thank you for reading hundoke reading. And yes, please make sure you to like and subscribe to our brothers, Auntie Melchor, ang ating isang kapatid na napaka-supportive, and also he is not only supportive with us here in YouTube, but also has a great heart and ability and the capacity of heart to love and support others. Siya yung kapartner ko ngayon na mag-collaborate to support our Filipino brothers in the Philippines. So, sundan at yakapin at mahalin ang Santi Melchor at Marbuk TV. Yan. At Pinay Lifestyle. Yes, usapan. Okay na, usapan natin yesterday, kapatid. Maraming salamat, kapatid. Yes, I received your support to our brother. Santi Melchor po is, and Buhay Buhay sa Amerika is partnering again to support our brother Joel Bulito. If you know the story of Joel Bulito, we will be sending something to Joel Bulito to help him and his mom. So if you wanted to take part and be a part of this collaboration of YouTubers helping another YouTuber in the Philippines to help support this brother's situation in the Philippines, Joel Bulito. Ayan, meron na kaming bagong maipapadala sa'yo. Sandy Melchor is sending you, and Buhay Buhay sa Amerika will be sending you something. And you message me what you need, and we will be sending you the ayuda. Kaya ito yung paraan how we YouTubers can help one another. And maraming salamat po. Dikitan ninyo yan, si Santi Melchor, ang ating kapatid. Maganda ang kanyang channel. You will learn so much about health, wellness, as well as you will enjoy the beautiful sceneries of Arizona with his pogi jeep, red jeep. Kaya thank you so much, kapatid Santi Melchor. Shout out to you for what you do, for your heart and your sacrifice to help our kababayan, not only our YouTubers, and not only becoming a YouTuber, but also becoming an access and a vessel to help mankind. Maraming salamat po. And that is what YouTubers are all about. Yes, kung tayong lahat ay magkakaroon ng pagkakaisa, pagmamahalan, ang mundo ay magiging peaceful talaga. Kaya next, join me again as I read this book. I hope you can join me. And kapatid Melchor, may isang book sa akin dahil sa ganda ng iyong puso. I hope you read this too and join me as we read this. Thank you so much and maraming salamat po mga kapatid, and God bless you and see you soon and see you again tomorrow. Bye!